Hello. I am coming on here today with something of a heavy heart, and I've taken my time in making this video and this response to recent revelations about abuse in breathwork. I hadn't realized until yesterday why I was not ready to come forward, what was blocking my voice, which is something quite unusual for me because I'm somebody who finds words a joy, and I'm normally very articulate and very able to encapsulate my feelings in words to a greater or lesser extent. However, many of you may already know that in recent weeks, a significant and serious case of abuse in breathwork has come to light, in particular in relation to Dan Brulee. Dan is a leading pioneer in the field of breathwork and has done an incredible amount of work in breathwork. He's written books, he's run trainings, he has been considered a leader in this field. And what recently came to light was a number of allegations of misconduct, in particular in relation to unethical use of touch, improper touch, sexual abuse, and a violation basically of boundaries, in particular in relation to women, female clients. We hear about this a lot in other fields of work, in particular in Tantra, but we've also seen it revealed recently in yoga. We saw it revealed in music with Narco Bear, with Bikram in yoga, in many fields of Neo-Tantra. And in some ways, it's a kind of inevitable part of the shadow of life that comes to the surface, and we always pray that it doesn't impact our relational field or our experience, either as clients, peers, facilitators, colleagues, whatever it is. But in this case it has, and it's created a big ripple in breathwork. Breathwork is largely an unregulated field, and to that extent, one of the blessings of this situation is that it's creating conversations much more around ethics in this practice, around training and the importance of training, the importance of understanding trauma in the body, understanding the principle of ethics in practice, understanding power dynamics in healing. That one in particular, I think, is really, really important to stress here. The understanding of the hierarchies of power, whether that be sexual, racial, cultural, social privilege, whatever it is that comes out. All of these things exist in the field of what it is to be human and in life. When we come into trainings that involve somatic, i.e. body-based work, what we often call the bottom-up approach to healing rather than the top-down therapeutic model, this becomes especially important because we might be using touch. Dan's recent apology was disappointing to me, I'm not going to lie. It felt scripted. I don't doubt that there was a lot of vulnerability in that. Well, I do doubt, actually, to some extent, but my prayer is that there was vulnerability in that, because we can't heal if we're not willing to be vulnerable. There was probably some fear in it. You know, this has been Dan's career for the last 40 years, and he's been very, very successful with it. So to suddenly have all of that collapse is probably a scary place for him to be. However, he is responsible for that. I don't say that in a harsh, uncaring way that doesn't acknowledge the full range of what it is to be human. Trauma begets trauma. Abuse begets abuse. So there may well be some story or some lineage there that hasn't been healed and that's been in the shadows, that's been sneaking out through Dan's work and suddenly has come to light as these voices have courageously come forward and shared their experiences. I would have liked to have seen and felt Dan in this way that I'm doing now. I would have liked to have felt his presence. I would have liked to have felt what it means to him, because that apology didn't connect with me in that way. And to come to the end and use the Ho'oponopono, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you, wasn't enough for me. In fact, it was a little crass, because in all honesty, the forgiveness that needs to be sought is from the women who were abused by him, to him and isn't about us forgiving him in his work and in his field. I don't think people are ready for that yet, and nor should they be. I want to come to why it's taken me a while to respond, and it was only yesterday when I was listening to a very excellent roundtable discussion by the team at the One Breath Institute. Thank you, Lisa and Debbie and all of you for that very insightful talk. But as I was listening to that talk, I realized that in my own body, in my visceral felt sense, why I had been contracting away from it. I have a history of abuse in my own background. I think many of us who come to this kind of work do, because we're, physician heal thyself. We're healing our own wounds. We've been healing our own stories. And a lot of that is integrated in me. Up here, it's processed and integrated. In here, there's a lot more feeling capacity for response. But I noticed as I was listening to the One Breath team talking that I was having this visceral response to the awareness of sexual misconduct in these fields of our beautiful sacred healing work. And what was happening for me was this sense of feeling almost dirtied by it. And then I suddenly went, oh my gosh, this is my embodied trauma response. I start to feel unsafe in these conversations because it activates in me the places where, in bringing my own abuse forward, I have felt unheard, unsafe, judged, criticized. You're to blame. You're the one that's responsible. Nobody's going to believe you, etc., etc. These stories are really commonly shared by people who've experienced any kind of form of sexual abuse. It also relates, of course, to emotional, mental, and physical abuse, but here we're talking particularly about sexual misconduct, which you can't separate from emotional and mental misconduct, in my opinion, because they have an impact and create a reservoir of a legacy that needs to be healed. But what I noticed for me was that in that response in my body, in my felt sense to this discussion about sexual misconduct, I was contracting, my voice was contracting. Oh, hang on a minute, that feels familiar. That feels like an old sensation that I know very well in my body. And I suddenly knew that in the recognition of that, now is the moment when I can bring forward my response. And my response is that under no circumstances ever is it okay, one, to do that, two, to claim ignorance. I didn't realize what I was doing. You've been teaching breathwork for 40 years. How are you teaching your students to recognize trauma? How are you teaching your students about ethics in practice? If you're not, then what are those people who've been taught by you going out into the world and doing? We teach very, very thoroughly and carefully in our training the importance of ethics in practice, particularly where there is leaking sexual energy or attraction. We're human beings. We may well find that we are attracted to our clients, our teachers, or people with whom there is a working relationship. However, it's not okay to act upon that. Within therapeutic guidelines, there are, certain conditions and requirements where you can be struck off if you haven't allowed anything from 12 months to 3 years between seeing a client and having a client and engaging in an intimate relationship with that client. And we don't have that in breathwork. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging attraction, although I don't suggest here in saying that you do that verbally with your clients. And the passing on of those clients, should that be something that grows in the space between you, has to be handled very sensitively so that somebody doesn't feel rejected or abandoned in a secondary response to codependence or projection of what is needed in that situation. Because when we're doing this healing work, these relationships that we've had are particularly important. Our unhealed relationships with our primary caregivers, our parents, our mothers, our fathers, our peers, our siblings, comes into the field. So if we acknowledge that there is an attraction in the space, either from the client towards us or from us towards the client, and then we either reject them too quickly or pass them on without being able to articulate why, or we don't do that and then we suddenly find that, oh, there's something in here and I'm enjoying this kind of dependence, I'm enjoying this attraction, then we are out of alignment and out of ethics. So every breathwork school that you go to, every breathwork facilitator that you go to should be working to a code of ethics. should be acknowledging verbally that your work is held in confidence and that you have the right to be touched or not to be touched in ways that are appropriate if you are accepting touch. So in our sessions, for example, we will say to people right at the beginning, we may use light intervention, we may use more significant intervention. That touch can sometimes be strong, it can sometimes be gentle, it will always be appropriate, and you always have the right to say, I don't want that, thank you very much, no touch. And we will ask people to give their consent in private, because people can feel very exposed saying they don't want touch. In a group setting, in a one-to-one setting, it's somewhat easier to negotiate that, but still you always have the right to say, I don't want touch. You also have the right to change your mind and say, actually, I feel that touch might be something helpful here, because for many of us, touch has not been safe in our lives. So it's normal that we might say, I don't want touch, but then we might realize that we feel that we're in safe hands and therefore we can invite that. What a betrayal when that touch that you have accepted and invited is misused. What a betrayal. So coming back to the essence of this, the facilitator should be giving you that opportunity to consent. They should also be telling you you can change your mind at any point if you've said either no or yes, and that the client's job is not to take care of you as a facilitator. Again, when we've had our boundaries violated and we suddenly find it jarring that we're touched and we have a reaction, a facilitator can become like rabbit in the headlights, freeze, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, which they shouldn't be doing, by the way. And then we feel that as the client, we have to take care of the facilitator. Oh, it's okay, you can touch. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean that. And suddenly we're in a fawning response, which is a classic trauma response. There's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We say to our students, I say to my students, I say to my clients, your job is not to take care of me. My job is to hold this space for you. If you need to swear at me because you're swearing at somebody that you could never swear at, if you need to tell me to back off because you've never been able to say that, I will not take that personally. And that is a skilled facilitator, one who understands enough the process that is unfolding in front of them and who can hold that in safe and ethical ways. And of course, as human beings, there are times when we might misread something or get something wrong, and that is where the value of supervision comes in. Oh, a client has asked me to meet them in an informal space somewhere to carry on talking about this, but I don't feel quite right, and yet I feel I need to give them an explanation. Trust your instincts. It doesn't feel quite right. Don't go to an informal space. Don't create intimacy that is more than is required of this session. How do you stay in professionalism? These questions come up all the time. And this is why we have codes of ethics. This is why we have governing bodies. This is why we have guiding principles in our work. And it's why more and more we are seeing the value, and not just the value, but the necessity, the fundamental necessity of trauma-informed training that takes place over more than a weekend or more than 3 weeks in a short course that cannot possibly be integrated. How can we do our own inner work? How can we feel our own responses to the material that we're being given when it's all being fast-tracked? Yes, it might cost you less money, but that's not the point. Yes, you can go on Udemy or some of these online Center of Excellence courses and do a course in connected breathwork. That is not going to give you the depth of the human connection and the skills to be able to hold this stuff properly. If you have not done your inner work, then you should not be holding space for others. That's step number one. Number two is maybe you have, and maybe there are blind spots. We've all got them. Be courageous enough to own your shadow, to know where your vulnerabilities are, to know when something is off, and to be able to reach out for support and reach out for supervision and reach out for peer-to-peer guidance, whatever it is that you need. And be honest, be radically honest. And this is the thing that doesn't sit so well with me, because when this all came out, Dan made a public statement that he was burnt out and he was taking a break, and that wasn't the truth. Okay, he was in a process of restorative justice, and I understand that, and that's complex. I really do understand how complex that is. In that process of restorative justice, none of us know the truth. Well, I certainly don't. Maybe the people who are involved in it do. The women who were abused, Dan himself, the boards who were supporting. It's very, very, very sensitive information and material. As somebody who's lived through that and been through that, I understand the complexities. So the two things I really want to say from this is, one, it's never okay to abuse our power and position, regardless of the field that we're in. Full stop, point blank, period. It's never okay to abuse our positions of power. Secondly, if you're in a situation where you feel that your own boundaries are being violated and there's something not right, trust that. Trust that and speak to that. Get help, ask for advice and support if you are able to. Thirdly, know that it is not your fault, that you didn't invite it and you didn't ask for it. Even if you are attracted to the facilitator who's doing that, it's their job not to collude with that. It's their job not to buy into that. It's their job to hold that space in integrity. So my voice is here, my voice is back, and these are some of the things that I want to say about this. My prayer is still that Dan will come forward and presence himself so that people can feel him. Our job as human beings is not to exile, ostracize, point fingers, shun, judge. Our job is to find the healing bridge in what's happened. I think there's already healing coming out of this in terms of the breathwork world and the importance of people recognizing the absolutely crucial nature of fundamental, thorough trainings in this work, of not buying into these fast track courses, of having more of a network that we can all tap into. And there's a part of me that's sorry to say that, because it's the women who've been abused by him that have paid the price for that conversation coming to the light. And in truth, it should have been there all along. But it wasn't. And if there's one thing I know, it's that we can't change the past, but we can change what we feel, how we act, and what we do going forward. So my message here today is that let something come from this that is in the highest interest and the most healing benefit of all involved, including Dan himself. I have a great prayer that whatever trauma is there that created that blind spot in him, that he can take full responsibility without annihilating himself, that he can actually stand in some kind of humble strength with it and find a way forward. Most importantly, my heart and my empathy and my desire for healing goes towards the people who were abused by him, and anybody who continues to be abused by people in power. This has got to stop. These times are over. These times of the hierarchy and the guru and the untouchable person at the top of the pyramid are over. We are all equal. We are all the same. One of the reasons people love my work and value what I say is because they say that you feel real, Steph. You acknowledge your vulnerability, you acknowledge your humanness, and you acknowledge that in others. And that doesn't mean that anything goes. That doesn't mean I'm all forgiving in that pious kind of religious way. It means that forgiveness takes time. We have to do the work to get to the place where we understand what has moved through us, where we understand what we have experienced in life, and we're able to process and digest. In other words, integrate that. So this is how I feel about the situation. And what I'm very clearly saying is hierarchies of power that create systems of abuse are never okay. And please trust your own boundaries. Thank you for listening to this statement. And I sincerely hope that it brings many of you a reassuring voice in this field, should you be ever in a situation where you feel that something is wrong, and that you're able to respond to that more quickly so that you don't put yourself in danger. I really thank you all for being part of this community of co-creation, and reach out if this has activated anything for you, and know that there is a community here who are all in support of coming into right relationship and walking in beauty, as the shamans say, where what we say and what we do and what we think and what we feel and how we act are all in alignment. Again, thank you for listening.